Women are mostly excluded from what we consider professions. There are a few doctors and lawyers and engineers and scientists and MBAs, but professional women are mostly social workers or teachers. In fact, 90% of professional women are teachers. And if you're an educated black woman, the only real job available to you is probably to be a teacher in a black school. There are a number of nurses, although nurses haven't organized quite to the level of profession yet. They will, as some of these other careers. And of course, female colleges, all women colleges, tended to have female professors. So that would be another avenue you could go if you were a woman. But within the progressive movement, the dominance of women was striking. Just like we saw back in the period in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s, that wave of reform, this wave of reform will also see a major input from women. They could not vote, and they were not allowed to hold public office, and they had very little professional power, and widely society did not believe they belonged in the public sphere. But despite all of this, we have women begin to organize and try to change society for what they believe to be the better. Now remember, women have seen these two worlds be created, the world of the home and the world of work. And of course, they're largely excluded from the world of work. Children are going to school now, so they don't have to take care of their home all the time. If you have any sort of income at all, there's cheap labor. You can hire somebody to do the housework. And this means a bunch of women with a bunch of time on their hands. You will also have an increase in the number of single women in society. And in fact, many of these reformers we're going to talk about were either women who were never married or we now know to be lesbians, although that would have been kept secret at the time. This was called a Boston marriage back in the day. Divorce rates are also increasing. In 1880, 1 out of 21 marriages ended in divorce. By 1916, 1 out of every 9 marriages ended in divorce, and almost all divorces, or the majority of them, are initiated by the woman. Women's clubs become common by the 1880s. This is an outlet for middle and upper class women who are intelligent and have a lot of energy and want to do something other than just sit at home all day and wait for the kids and the husband to come home from school and work. In 1892, the General Federation of Women's Clubs organizes 100,000 women in 500 clubs into one massive national group. By 1917, they have more than 1 million members in this group. And they evolve from social clubs, where they sit around and gossip, to clubs that are targeted at real serious reforms that will change America. They plant trees, they support schools, they build libraries, they run the settlement houses that we talked about a minute ago, they build hospitals and parks, they push laws regulating child and female labor, they demand workplace safety, food and drug regulation, protection for the Native American tribes, improvements in urban housing, temperance, which we'll get to later. They also got states to pass laws providing mother's pensions for women who had been abandoned or widowed. Because if women weren't really allowed to work, they had no way to take care of themselves. In 1912, they get the government to create a children's bureau in the Labor Department to make sure kids are being treated fairly. In 1903, we see the Women's Trade Union League, which encourages union membership among women and organizes women and goes on strikes. They march, they raise money, they pay bail of other organizers who get arrested. Black women, unfortunately, are mostly excluded. But there is a National Association for Colored Women that campaigns against things like lynching and segregation. Unfortunately, that did not have as much success because black people still really don't have much political power in this country at this point. But we do see the beginnings of organization there as well. Of course, the great achievement of the women's movement is going to be women's suffrage. It seemed radical at the time. The women who supported suffrage rejected this idea of spheres because, of course, in the spheres argument, the woman's sphere was the home, and she was supposed to stay out of politics. That was part of the man's sphere. They argued that women had natural rights just like men, and among those rights were the right to participate in their government. There was an anti-suffrage movement, which had both men and women in it, who considered women voting a threat to the natural order of the universe. And they said that if women voted, we would see a spike in divorce, promiscuity, and children would be neglected as women became consumed with politics and were unable to take care of their own houses. Anna Howard Shaw and Carrie Chapman Catt organized the National American Women's Suffrage Association. It had 193,000 members by 1893, more than 2 million by 1917. They said women won't leave their sphere of the home. They would just bring spirituality and nurturing and a morality to politics that wasn't there with only men involved. It was also seen as a way to pass temperance. Many men, for various reasons we'll get into later, wanted to see alcohol banned, and they saw giving women the right to vote as something that would help their cause, and so they did gain male allies that way. There was also a great belief that if women were given the right to vote, we would never go to war again, because certainly no woman would ever vote for a politician who supported a war. Of course, it's also important to realize that Western states had already began giving women the right to vote. You see the map up there. Western states, who had a hard time attracting women to move out there because they were relatively uncivilized, figured that if they gave women the right to vote, maybe women would come. It didn't work, but it did get women the right to vote. In 1910, Washington State becomes the first new state in 14 years to give women the right to vote, and that's rapidly followed by California, Mississippi, Illinois, New York, and Michigan over the next 7 years. By 1919, 39 states at least have partial suffrage for women, if not complete suffrage for women. 15 of those have total suffrage for women. So by the time the 19th Amendment is passed in 1920, women are really voting in a lot of states outside the South. And a few northern states, of course, the South. Some militant feminists like Alice Paul say this isn't enough. They want an equal rights amendment. They want a 14th Amendment that applies to women, so it applies to gender and not just race. But most women, honestly, are happy with the right to vote, and the women's rights movement after the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920 will enter into what they call the doldrums and will not be revived again until the 1960s. And in reality, when women get the right to vote, they overwhelmingly vote the same way that their husband does. And so it doesn't end up having a dramatic effect on who wins elections.